On this episode of ShiftED podcast, I had the great privilege of talking with Juliet Robertson. She's an outdoor specialist in education and the author of Dirty Teaching and Messy Maths. It was amazing to connect with her. I connected with her from her home in Scotland, and we had such a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I had talking with her. I just kind of wanted to, I sent you some questions that we were going to kind of have a chat around. And I'd just love to know how it all began. How did your journey bring you to this stage in your life now?
Well, funnily enough, there's actually no obvious starting point or what I would call a divine aha moment.
Okay.
As a teacher, there's always been some emphasis on teaching outdoors in almost any curriculum anywhere. And back in the early 90s, when I started being an elementary teacher here in Scotland, this included standard things, mini beasts, bird studies, standard environmental education activities alongside adventurous pursuits such as canoeing, snowshoeing, hiking, that sort of thing, which would be led by a qualified outdoor educator.
Great.
So I think what's exciting now is that we've become much more flexible in our interpretation, and we now recognise, I would say, in almost worldwide, that all curriculum areas and a much bigger range of possibilities exist than was traditionally undertaken 30 to 50 years ago. And I think the other thing that's changed is that we value educators, that is elementary teachers and preschool teachers, as being competent to work outside with classes. Not necessarily to do everything outside, but certainly a lot of very simple material that is directly relevant to the ongoing work within the classroom.
Right. I had noticed too that doing some research about Scotland and the outdoor learning journey that Scotland has gone through, that it has been going on for quite a long time. Is that accurate to say?
Yes. What really was the game changer in Scotland was in 2004, we completely changed our curriculum, and we now have what's called Curriculum for Excellence. And the term outdoor learning was first formally referenced when this came out in 2004. And in 2007, a document was published called Taking Learning Outdoors. And that was very good. And it just set the framework for everyone to start thinking about what might this look like. And I think that was very, very helpful. And it's not a well-known document. Often it's forgotten about now, but that was the starting point in many ways. Yeah. And since then, we've had about 20 odd documents published.
Right. That kind of laid the foundation for. And maybe I'd like to ask you that, did teachers, how did they receive that? When they were first, this initial push and this new curriculum came in, what was the teachers' reaction and how did they respond to it?
Well, it's been interesting. I would say whilst the ideas have been there, at the front line, there is still ongoing work to have the outdoors recognised both as a place, a context, and an approach to learning. Even now, we're talking 14, 15 years on, this is an ongoing work, because there is something very challenging about a culture that says real learning happens inside. Mm-hmm. And I think worldwide, that is the default assumption, which is a very tough nut to crack. Now, it is cracking. There is no doubt, particularly within our early years. So our preschoolers and our first few years, our kindergarten teachers are really beginning to come on board. But I still frequently, even now, have people going, yeah, but your books are aimed at early years. They're not for me. I'm a grade 5 teacher. And I have to go, no, I actually work with grade 5s at the moment, and grade 5s, grade 6s, those are a key push for me. So it's a very interesting assumption that's made.
Absolutely. What's the difference between the grade 5 and a preschool or a kindergarten class in their approach to coming outside? Is there a difference?
Without a doubt, yes, because I think in the early years, things absolutely have to be more playful. The opportunities, I mean, a play-based curriculum is the ideal, and understanding how to observe children, to ask yourself, where is the learning in what they are doing? So if a child is running around, where's the learning in running around? And how do I, as a teacher, extend that learning? Is much more different to having a look at, say, grade 5, where we are covering angles outside or time, and we can more tightly link. I would actually argue it's easier. We've been trained as a general rule to cope better with a grade 5 traditional formal way of teaching than we have a play-based way, unless you've been exceptionally lucky or you've been brought up in a teaching system that really focuses on play-based learning.
Right. And what's the approach of encouraging teachers to go out more and supporting them with maybe the unknown? Because oftentimes I see teachers have the interest. They'll come and attend webinars as we talk about outdoor learning, but they're just not really sure where to start. Where do you think is the best avenue to get teachers out as a starting point with their outdoor learning journey?
Well, I think in many ways that's the whole approach of Dirty Teaching. The first book I wrote was this: what on earth do you do when you don't know what to do outside? And it's an unusual book in that I didn't go down traditional curriculum avenues, because I very deliberately wanted people to set the context with, actually, have you actually walked your schoolyard? Do you know what's there? Do you know what's in your neighbourhood? Because if you've driven every day to school and you've never actually gotten out, you might not know what exists. How do you actually get outside? Now, that should not be a question you ever have to ask. But in my experience, again, some schools are like Alcatraz. Do you know what I mean? Get outside is a serious big deal. If you've got to go down, walk along a corridor, 3 flights of stairs to go down, to get a key from the school administration, to go back to another official designated outdoor route, to then open up an area and things like that. No wonder nobody's going outside in that school. It's talk about putting physical barriers in place. So I think the important thing is a little bit of groundwork. But the other thing too is that often people who struggle the most in their minds have made outdoor learning into something much bigger than what it needs to be. And I always say, start with doorstep activities. Meet your class after recess when they've still got their jackets on, and say hi, and have 10 minutes outside where you might play a quick game in a circle. Now, you might argue, but I could do that indoors. Yes, of course you can. But doing it outside is different. Just like if you have a cup of coffee in the staff room and you have a cup of coffee outside, they are different experiences, even though you're drinking coffee. You know, outside you have to wonder about, how come, where's a nice place to sit? How come everything's cold outside? Will that bird get my nice cookie that I've got with me? And things like that. So there's different things to think about. So I just say, go literally back and don't worry about what's proper outdoor learning and what isn't proper outdoor learning. Just start the habit and build the expectations with your children that this is learning time now outside, not playtime, not recess. and that we're having a short, sharp focus on a little bit of learning, and then we go back inside. And you can start that at any time of the year. And in fact, I really got going in January, February, when I really decided to commit to regular learning outside. And by the time we hit the summer, boy, we were just one cool class outside because we've got through all the challenges of how do you keep warm outside. And that's another thing, you know, so again, your children can make up a chant and you can share ideas with children about how you keep warm outside, like do little dances and things like that.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that I like the just the step outside, you know, like the little kind of incrementally bring it in rather than it just being a floodgate, because I could see it being overwhelming with the mindset that we have of traditional classrooms and what's expected. And I mean, it's a lot of luggage that you carry around. It's hard to liberate yourself from that and go, you know, make it that this is something that is valuable to the kids and to me in my class. It's interesting you're talking about free play as well outside, because recently here in Quebec, we've just introduced a new preschool program where it's play-based. And now they offer 2 60-minute periods of free play a day for the children. And that's where we're finding a lot of questions coming up as to what would I do during a free play? Because it's not recess, it's not lunchtime, it's free play, and teachers are trying to wrap their heads around, well, what would I do? How do I approach this? I'd love your take on that. Free play to you, what is that? What does it mean? What's your definition, or how do you see that?
I think that's, for me, free play is where the children have the choice over how they play, who they play with, and what they're doing in their play. To facilitate high quality free play means, as educators, we have to give full attention to the environment in which that happens. Now, children will play wherever. Do you know what I mean? So you can send them into a asphalt concrete yard and they will play. But if you want high quality play, then you need to be offering materials and an environment that facilitates that. So when we look at that environment, we want to provide sand, for example, water experiences. We want to be able to provide natural materials, sort of like an abundance of sticks and cones and other things that children can use in their play. We might want some junk materials, for example, old tubes and guttering and pipes and things like that. Bread crates are another thing that are very good. And on top of that, we might also want to think about how we make the most of the weather and other variables that happen. So that's a lot to think about. Yeah, if you've never had to think about that, that is a huge thing to think about. But if you invest in the time in creating a really good environment, and this does not necessarily require money, and in fact, I can send you the link to an example of a play-based a playground that we changed for less than $2,000.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'd love to see that for sure.
And
really
we
cool.
did it with grade 5 children working with preschoolers to develop it, so that it was built over in actually quite a short space of time, but the planning took a while, and it was done against the odds. You know, like we had a death of a child in the school, we had a change of school principal, we had a class that was too busy. The grade 5 class, with all the transitions to high school, were just so busy. So everything, but we persisted, because what we wanted to do was to show what is the reality of trying to do a project. Do you know what we don't want is a nice little bespoke project, where it's fine. They've been given loads of funding. They've got time set aside. That's not real life. Real life is no money, no time, lots of stress, and high expectations from our authorities above that we are still going to create great attainment.
Right. It sounds very like it's a lot of work at the front end to establish these environments for the children. But once these environments have been established, it's time. That's where you back away and let the children take over.
Absolutely. And another thing you can do, which is a really good thing to do with children, is if you want to have conversations, and you're not sure, I suggest to teachers, take photos and very short video clips of children at play. And then once you've finished your hour, maybe after that or the following afternoon, if it's happened in the morning or something like that, show you the children one or two of these. The children love seeing themselves when they're little, and get them to talk about it. What is it they were doing? What were they playing? What were they learning from doing this? What were they having problems with? So it could be that you discover that the children were trying to build a den, but they weren't very successful because they don't know how to tie things. So then you can have a quick session, inside or out, where you practice tying things. Or you might realize that if you buy Velcro, there's a certain type of Velcro that slaps on top of each other, and that actually makes it really easy in -10 below to tie things together, with mitts on.
Absolutely. I want to go and play outside now.
Yeah.
It's really, what are some of your earliest memories of play? Like when you think back, because I had this interesting conversation with some teachers. We were talking about play, and I was like, think about back to your childhood. Like, what did you do pre-tablets and computers and screens and TV? Well, I mean, there was TV, but the quality was so. I mean, what were your earliest memories of play?
So for me, I grew up in a large family. I had 3 sisters. So there were 4 of us born within less than 5.5 years. So we were left a lot to ourselves because my mum was busy with little children. So we were turfed outside. We had a big garden, an acre, and we were just left to play there. So a lot of that was with my older sister to begin with, and then as the younger sisters came and got older, that was also part of it as well. And there was, and I would say a lot of that was imaginative play and just play by picking up stuff. So interesting, and a lot of physical activity. I wasn't particularly outdoorsy, which often surprises people, because I felt the cold and I was never adequately dressed for being outside, really. But my motivation was physical play. So we had big high walls to climb. We had rope swings to play on and things like that. So that worked for me.
And your parents were never worried that you might get hurt swinging or running in trees, or because we often hear about this risky play that kind of makes some people nervous, of like the times of where we would get kicked outside to go and play seem to happen less nowadays. And I mean, there's numerous reasons why. There's a plethora of reasons, but do you have any ideas on how to get kids nowadays out more? Like how to ease those fears that we might have? Like, because I do talk to teachers and they do have this, like, that might be too dangerous, and I don't want to have to be responsible if they get hurt. And so there's this, like, this debate always going on between the safety part and letting kids develop as they need to develop.
So we were very lucky in the UK. I think luckier than North America, because I say North America because although Canada isn't as litigious as the US, I think at the back of their mind there is always that concern, and I think our culture in Britain has been really helpful. So our Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents talk about making things as safe as necessary and not as safe as possible. You cannot make things as safe as possible, so don't even try. But is this as safe as it needs to be? And have you considered the foreseeable risks? And not everything will be foreseeable. And some things will be obvious. So height is obvious to 90% of children. For the 10% that it isn't, you know that child. So you'll be watching that child who has no sense of height and danger. Okay, but you know that kid. So that's the one you keep an extra eye on. The second thing to be aware of is that we all bring with us to our work a baggage of emotions and experiences. So I love heights. I am not frightened by seeing children climb to the top of a tree, because that's the sort of thing I did in my youth. Yes, I fell out of trees. The branches caught me. I survived, that sort of thing. I'm comfortable around trees and children. But you put me into a confined space with trikes and hoops and balls, and I am sweating. My palms are sweating and I worry. I do not like that situation. I would never advocate that. But that might be much more acceptable to somebody else. So in other words, what you can do then is have those discussions with your colleagues. What do you cope with and you feel comfortable with? And what do you feel less comfortable with? And then you can allocate duties accordingly. And then the other thing to do is that when you see something happen that causes you concern, you may not have time, you may have to step in because you're that worried, but afterwards reflect and say to your colleagues, did I jump in too soon there? You know, would you have done the same? What would I do differently next time? Or what do we need to put in place to enable this to happen? So I think those sorts of conversations can really help. And I can think of one school where there was this lovely teacher, and she brought me outside because there were 3 children playing with skipping ropes. They were standing on a bench and they were flicking the skipping ropes over this fence. And it was great. They were all engaged, having a great time, and clearly developing a lot of physical dexterity doing this, and balance and coordination. And she said to me, I'm really worried about this. And we talked through, and it turned out the reason why she was worried was because when a few years earlier, a neighbour of hers had died because he'd been up a tree. This young child had been up a tree with a rope. He'd slipped, fallen out, and had hung himself accidentally on the rope. No wonder she was paranoid. For sure. About ropes and children being up high. That to me was a very normal response. But once we discussed where that fear came from, she was able to manage that much, much better. She was reassured. It was like, aha, now I know why I feel the way I do.
Right. I like that idea of the conversations that need to happen, particularly when you're kind of dealing with something new or you're unfamiliar with. And
yeah, absolutely. And it's, again, it goes back to those baby steps. So you might be nervous about having sticks for children to play with outside. I totally understand that. It is really scary. If you just dump a load of big sticks into your schoolyard and go play on, oh my goodness me, that could end up in some very stressful situations. So what you can do is you can start by training yourself and the children with twigs. Just ask for a bundle of twigs, and then after a couple of sessions, get some bigger sticks in and grow your sticks and grow your own confidence and your children's ability to use them in ways that are comfortable. And it's perfectly okay to have that conversation with children going, we need to be careful when we have sticks. And we've had situations in one school I worked with, they had a child, a very small area outside, so 500 children in a tiny area, and they had sticks at playtime, and the playground assistants had a child with a visual impairment, so they were really worried about this child not being able to see the ends of the sticks and being in the middle of something. And they had a discussion with the children, they had a discussion with themselves, and rather than banning sticks for being dangerous, they came up collectively with the idea of painting the ends of the sticks in fluorescent paint so that the child who had visual impairment could see the ends of the sticks.
Brilliant.
You know,
Great
fantastic.
ideas.
Yeah.
Again, simple but effective, right? Like, wow.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. So, Juliet, how did you come to sharing all of these ideas in your in these books that you wrote? Because I mean, they are fantastic. I have to just, I am very in love with these books, and I share them whenever I can. And I'm just so curious, how did they come to be? How did they evolve?
So a lot of it was not by intent on my side. Everything I kind of happens to me accidentally or serendipitously. So I had written a government document called Outdoor Learning Practical Guidance for Teachers and Educators in Scotland. And because I'd written a government document, I felt that I had the experience and the competency to move into England. So I joined an education consultancy that was English and Welsh based, because I noticed that they didn't have anybody who specialised in outdoor learning and play. But I also noticed that all the consultants there had books. And I thought, well, that could be an interesting avenue for me to explore. And the publishing company that worked with this group of associates approached me and said, would you write a book? So that's how it came about.
Nice. And Dirty Teaching is the first one, and then you moved into Messy Math?
Yes, that's right. So Dirty Teaching, and I can't take credit for the title. The guy, Ian Gilbert, who set up this consultancy firm, he came up with it, which is lovely. So I owe him a lot, because it's a wonderful title, and it's very eye-catching and memorable. It's not so good though if you organise a conference online, because some local authorities in Britain have banned the two words together because it sounds inappropriate. And I get a lot of interesting followers on Twitter, who because there's a series of dirty teacher videos that are not about teaching.
Interesting. And all of the ideas that are within the book, are those ideas that you had interacted with and had played with in your past as well, in your teachings?
Yes, so all of these were trial and error. Most people think that you must be a fantastic teacher to write a book. I would say the opposite. I'm not a particularly talented teacher, but I'm willing to reflect and learn on my mistakes. So I think I've always experimented. And particularly since 2007, when I decided that it was really important to go back and really develop outdoor learning and play, I just started going outside, and I made every mistake that you can possibly imagine. So this is really me talking about the mistakes I have learned.
I think that's a great approach, because I mean, we say mistakes are important because it is our gateway to our learning, right? It's not the way our system tends to work, because they want the right answer, not the mistake. So we do have students that hate those mistakes as well. They don't want any mistakes. I want the right answer. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I wanted to touch a little bit on the Messy Math. What's your mindset with introducing subjects to young kids, and how do you go about it? How would you recommend going about teaching? Because whenever we think of math, we're thinking of, okay, desks, you're going to do worksheets, we'll quiz you, and then I run into Messy Math, and you blew my mind away with, wait a minute, there's other ways. Could you expand on that a bit?
So I wrote Messy Math because I was frustrated. There weren't that many books covering maths outside in the early years. In fact, I actually wanted to write the elementary math book, but you really have to start at the early years. And I was frustrated because all the activities were quite formal in these books. And the bit was, oh yeah, and you can put a few pots and pans in a mud kitchen, and let them play and make sure they're different sizes. And I'm going, this is wrong. We want it to be the other way around in the early years. We want to set up ideal contexts and environments for the maths to naturally learn. And the formal elements, such as the games and things, should be the last thing rather than the first. So if we get the play conditions right, the maths will emerge. So if we think back to a child running around outside and we go, well, where's the maths in that, which is one of the chapters, straight away you can say, well, if you say to a child who's running around, I love how well you run. Would you like me to time you to see how fast you are going? Suddenly you're introducing an element of time. You're offering that. And of course, there's about 7 different ways of recording time. You might offer a stopwatch. You might have that electric or analog. You might have a sand timer. You might start by jumping and say, I wonder how many jumps it will take me while you run around the playground, and you might do 10 jumps and they've run around. Another one might be, for example, I might count in elephants, or do you know what I mean? There's so many different ways of recording and capturing time. So certainly the children need to know those. They need to understand standard and non-standard units of measure. So certainly that's a whole thing in itself. And that's just time. We haven't even talked about coming first, second, or third. We haven't talked about faster or less fast or more fast or slower and things like that. We haven't talked about other things around just the act of running. So once you start to map these out, you realize that there's 101 conversations that can be had about anything a child is doing of their own choice outside. So that's the beauty of it. The annoying thing about Messy Maths is actually that only covers a small fraction. My first draft was too big and I had to cut it back by about a third because the publisher said no one wants to read a big book.
Will you have a Messy Math part 2?
No, but I do have things on my website that cover areas that don't. So I have things like a Maths in the Sandpit handout, which is great, and it just covers things that are mathematical about a sandpit and all the different resources. So why I have a rolling pin always beside in a sandbox or a sandpit, because that's the concept of level. If you don't understand the concept of level, you won't understand about stacking, which is an essential property of a 3-dimensional object. Do they stack or do they roll? Or if they're wobbling, it's because they're not level. So again, things like that suddenly come into play. So I would argue that with being outside and a play-based approach, we really get the time to drill in some basic conceptual understanding that if we jump straight into formal stuff, we will miss. We will have to go back and recover it. And very much the temptation is in our fast education system. It's a bit like going to McDonald's at the moment. It's like, how quick can we give you your burger? How quick can we get you to count and add within 20? Whereas actually what we really want to do is to understand what the cardinal principles are of counting. And once we've got those, what does counting in base 10 mean? Because once we've got those, actually we can add and subtract very quickly. Do you know what I mean? But actually understanding cardinality takes a lot of work. And it isn't best done with a worksheet. It's actually best done through play and practical experience.
I love that idea of kind of creating the environment and then finding the occasions where you would bring in a concept or talk to the kids about a concept rather than it being at the forefront of, before we play with it, let me talk to you for an hour about, rather than through discovery and experiential and finding those moments within the play to And I imagine that during those times of play, it's very like if the child is then, okay, I've seen the leveling, I'm going to go, and like it's a come and go, right? I mean, it's not, let's sit down now, let me formally show you what all this, all these concepts are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Well, Juliet, I want to thank you tremendously for just finding some time and just having this conversation. I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but I want to respect our our time that we allocated. It was really, really a pleasure talking with you. I mean it from the bottom of my heart, and I really thank you for putting these books in the world. I think that I know they helped me a lot, and I know a lot of the teachers, they've helped them as well, kind of just to get our heads around some of these new mindsets that we're dealing with. So I want to thank you, and I want to wish you a really nice holiday season that's coming up, that's not far away. And I hope that our paths cross again one day.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And one thing I do know is that educators in Quebec and other parts of Canada really do have high standards, high expectations, and they will do play-based learning justice. They will. It will take practice, it will take experimenting, but they have to remember that experiments never fail. Just keep going. That's why we have the light bulb, because Thomas Alva Edison kept experimenting.
That's
It is worth it.
That's right.
This will revitalize your teaching, and if it's not working, get back in touch. Do you know what I mean? And that, because there's always people who can help, and who can help unpick where the issues are and maybe possible solutions. We may not have answers, but we can have suggestions.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes it's just feeling like you're not the only one struggling with this, that it's a universal thing. We're all going to struggle with it, but that's okay, because we are pushing it forward. So,
yeah. And I would say I went through that struggle. So to be honest, I don't think I fully gained confidence in play-based learning until I wrote the Messy Maths book and had to really go deep into it. It really pushed me to really understand the nub of what I was trying to do. So don't feel it's a magical thing, and it is a skill, and it is much harder than just formal education where we look and go, oh, what's in this scheme? Oh, we're doing measurement outside today, really. Do you know what I mean? That's the easy thing. Do you know what I mean? The play-based approach, but it's much more rewarding, it's much more engaging, and it's much more empowering for the children with whom we work and for ourselves as educators.
Absolutely. Well, lots of nuggets there, Juliet. Lots of things to think about. Thank you so much again. It's just been,